So we have Mr. Russell Hopson with us today, and I didn't bring a whole lot of information about his bio and his biography, but he has been studying, as are other experts, what I call them local experts, telling you local history, because no one has studied these more than the people who actually live here. So Mr. Hopson has spent a chunk of his life
A huge chunk.
studying exactly this, which is, as I said, not known information for most of the rest of us. The only thing I'll say is that he's a graduate of James Weldon Johnson High School, celebrating his 50th year,
Yes.
which he says I'm allowed to say. And then I'll have to admit, 1962 was a really good year.
It was an excellent year.
So without further ado, please welcome Mr. Russell Hopson.
I'm going to start off primarily with a little nuance before I get into the major information in regard to the census. When one thinks of war, starvation, and pestilence are the causes of population dislocations, it is generally someone else and somewhere else in the world. We as Americans lack an historical perspective of the domestic reference to massive dislocations. The American Civil War created hundreds of thousands of refugees, victims of a conflict between citizens and the dismantling of the institution of slavery. The destruction and the misery of the human condition is further complicated by the phenomena of race culture. These dislocations were further perplexed by the breakdown of civil authority and the reconstruction of society yet not defined. During the period from 1865 to 1870 on the peninsula, located between the James and York Rivers and the Tidewater in Virginia, the scenario of a post-Civil War South in Virginia is being played out in microcosm. One of the prominent players in this political melodrama was York County, Virginia. It is the site of one of the largest concentrations of black freedmen who fled Confederate-controlled areas and the plantations of former masters. These refugee camps stretched the breadth and the length of York County. Their presence caused consternation for the Union Army centered at Fort Monroe and Fortress Yorktown, and for the local white community who was threatened by their numbers and their presumption of equality and freedom. York County, which was in the throes of dislocation, was a result of war now on the verge of a new experiment of the meaning of freedom and equality. The experiment involved the dynamics of Reconstruction, one in which new leadership emerged to foster political, social, and economic equality for black freedmen. On April the 9th, 1865 in Yorktown, Virginia, upon hearing the news of the defeat of the Confederacy and the surrender of Robert E. Lee at Appomattox Courthouse, a black woman running from a plantation house fell to the ground and uttered, quote, "I jump up and scream, glory, glory, hallelujah to Jesus. I scream, glory to God. Come down and free us. No big man could do it. I'm startled or scared or afraid somebody's going to hear me." So I fell to the ground and I rolled over and I kissed the ground for the Lord's sake. I was so full of all praise for Master Jesus. So he did this great work. The soul buyers can never take the two children left me. No, never can take them from me. No more, no more. The population of York County, 1867, in regard to voter rights, white population was 425, black voter population was 1,188, or 73.5% of the voting group at that time. 1900, the white population of York County was 3,401, the black population was 4,081, or 54.5%. York County was a part of what was called the Black Belt counties. They made up the eastern part of Virginia and stretched into the Piedmont of Virginia. The conditions in which one would find oneself at that given time, there were more than 40,000 freedmen living on the peninsula. York County's black population was approximately 5,000. The Freedmen's Bureau reduces the rations of the freedmen to force them to return to their home counties. An increase in the lack of food to an exhausted winter. York and Warwick counties were especially hit hard by malnutrition, pneumonia, and smallpox. Ex-Confederates and their supporters attempt to reimpose a master-servant relationship. Black schoolhouses were burnt in Yorktown, and there were assaults made upon northern whites. Black and white violence escalated in the Lower Peninsula following the Norfolk Race Riot in April of 1866. Lieutenant Massey, the Freedmen Bureau officer of York County, quote, "Freedmen are ill-disposed, feel that they have committed crimes with impunity, to the attitude that blacks had no rights that whites needed to respect, and the freedom needed to reply that the Southern whites had no laws that blacks needed to obey. Freedom of the county was easily governed. Freedmen of the county were easily governed by U.S. authorities, but civil authorities they appeared to entertain most bitterly," close quote. The Union Army census of the colored population of York County, March of 1865. Herman G. Gutman, as a part of the endnotes of his book, Black Family and Slavery and Freedom, 1750 to 1925, used data gathered from the manuscript referred to as the Union Army Census of the Colored Population of York County, Virginia, March of 1865. The census tract is a part of the records of field offices of the State of Virginia Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands, 1865 to 1872. Record Group 105. This document provided information of historical, anthropological, genealogical, sociological significance. The comments made by the census takers provided insight into the attitudes of Union Army officials and those of the black freedmen themselves. There were approximately 9,500 black freedmen that lived in Elizabeth City County and York County. However, before the census is released, the numbers have grown because of the Union Army expansion and movement towards Richmond. The havens created reached into the tens of thousands. The first slave town, and there are two slave towns if you're not familiar with it. The first slave town was located in Elizabeth City County, west of Hampton. It derived its name because the freedmen's houses were constructed of old packing crates. The later settlement near Yorktown also took the name Slab Town because they took the outer part of the trees that had been harvested and they were used to build dwellings. The refugees lacked clothing, firewood, steady work, and food. There was the frequency of death from disease, exposure, and hunger. Of the more than 10,000 refugees believed in the area, about 4,001 were drawing army rations. Many of them were the wives and the children of black soldiers. The constant threat of violence by white vigilante groups, marauding Union Army soldiers, and the breakdown of law and order confronted the freedmen on a daily basis. The bureaucratic inertia to increase rivalry and conflict between the Department of Negro Affairs, local commanders, and little cooperation from the Union quartermasters and subordinate officers. Conflicts and visions of freedom between the Union Army and the Department of Negro Affairs and the freedmen as a result of attempts to reduce the number of freedmen on the Lower Peninsula. Solution number one, placing freedmen in the homes of the North, premised on the belief that the freedmen would develop skills, as a result would attempt to provide educational opportunities. Number two solution was the resettlement of other blacks to other plantations. And there was even one plan to send them to Key West, Florida. I've attempted to find research on that, but I have not been able to do so thus far. However, there were problems in regard to the Union Army solutions. First was the definition of freedom. Reduce the probability of the success of the two proposed resolutions. And the emergence of Daniel, Robert, and Frederick Norton into the mix furthered black political aspirations. Next, please. This is a map of Virginia in 1870. Next, please. A map of York County, 1859. Next, please. These are the commanders at Fortress Yorktown during the Civil War. And perhaps the one that you are most familiar is General Westcott. They are the ones that put into place the Union authorities and what was going to be the criteria of how the freedmen were going to be treated. Now increasingly, as you probably or you may not know, York County was not included as a part of the Emancipation Proclamation. And along with Elizabeth City County, York County, Portsmouth, Norfolk, and that general area, because they were all under Union control. The Emancipation Proclamation only freed those that were under Confederate control, not under Union control, nor even those slave states that were still within the Union. Next, please. These are the government farms. These are the sanctuaries that were sought by black freedmen that had fled, because in 1864, late 1864, early 1865, the push is on against Richmond. Whole areas now are involved in combat that is located further to the west and in relationship to Richmond, and there are hundreds and thousands of people who are fleeing. You can see the Adams Farm, the Bartlett Farm. The ones that you're probably more familiar with is Belfield, Bennett's Farm, Chisman's Creek, Cook's Farm, Curtis Farm, Dr. Powers Farm, Fort Yorktown itself, Glebe Farm, Howard's Land, James Kirby's Farm, Mrs. Anderson's Farm, near Big Bethel, Fishneck, Old Mill, different spelling for Poquoson Island, Pappy's Land, River Shores, the Russell Farm, Shady Banks, Slabtown, Stumptown, Sugar Hill, Tenzo's Farm, Williamsburg, Wormsley Creek. Next, please. These are some of the various questions or issues that was dealt with by the census. The whole numbers, number and family, names, age, sex, residence, occupation. Does he supply his family with labor? Number of children, old, helpless persons dependent upon. Head of the family for support. Soldiers or sailors, wives and children. Dependent in whole or in part upon the government for support. Able-bodied men and women, and remarks. Next, please. The information I'm providing to you comes from Gutman's book, who provides a detailed analysis of the population at that time. And these were some of the various occupations that were held by the black freedmen who lived in these general areas. Shoemakers, laborers, carpenters, basket makers, soldiers, cooks, storekeepers, teamsters, lumbermen, washwomen, sailors, grocers, school teachers, and ambulance drivers. Next, please. This is a breakdown of the skills that was held by the means of the various freedmen, being farm laborers and other laborers, 86%, servants, 1%, artisans, 9%, high occupation status, 4%. Next, please. This is a breakdown in the numbers of those that lived on the various farms. Occupation of adult males, 21 and older, York County Population Center, 1865. Ages 20 to 29, farmer, 58, 59. For oysterman, farmer and oysterman, 9, laborer, 31, servant, artisan, and others. And then it goes further into the other age groups. Most people don't have a clue that the great number of oystermen in York County, James City County, these are black freedmen at the end of the Civil War. They are the bulk of the occupation that involves themselves in getting monies from the river itself. And then it breaks it down into the total numbers across. Next, please. I'm going to provide a little bit more information on a number of these particular farms. Slabtown, it was last known as Uniontown, and it ceased to exist in the 1960s. Tinsley's Farm, Warren Farm, Williamsburg. I also will do Cook Farm and Russell Farm. Next, please. From the census itself, this is the Warren Farm census. Next, please. And these are the various families that lived on these farms. These are their surnames. The Baileys, which I think a good number of them come from Surrey. Surrey is a contentious area during most of the war. It is back and forth between Union and Confederate control. So seeking sanctuary in York County and James City County becomes a logical place to go. The Bankses, which are indigenous or native to the northern part of York County, and they're also my family surname of southern York County. The Brownings, the Carters, the Elliots are also from Surrey. The Fields come from Sussex and Surrey. The Hickmans, the Jacksons, a long establishing of free blacks that already lived in York County prior to the Civil War. The Oranges come out of New Kent and Charles City. The Paynes, the Wallaces, which are indigenous to the northern part of York County and James City County. The Whippies, the Whitings, which are also indigenous to the county, and the Winds. And I believe the Winds is named after a plantation that is located in York County. Next, please. Next is the Tinsley Farm. And you will see a listing of the various names that was taken by the census taker. Next, please. More traditional African American names. The Ashbys, the Bankses, the Carters, the Cumbers, the Gillettes, the Humpleys, the Jenkins, the Lightfoots, the Littletons, the Parrots, the Randalls, Red Crosses, the Richardsons, Thorntons, the Tollivers, which I am distantly related to, the Wallaces, the Washingtons, and again, the Winds and the Wells. Next, please. This is Williamsburg Farm. It is more of an expanded area of York County. Next, please. More traditional African American family names. The Umfields, the Ashbys, the Chismans, the Crumps, the Dixons, the Elfs, the Hills, the Mercers, the Prestons, the Red Crosses again, the Tollivers, the Weavers, and the Wrights. Next, please. These are the refugee families of Slabtown. The Armsteads again, the Bankses, the Bassetts, which come from somewhere else and eventually will move to Elizabeth City County. The Billets, which comes out of Gloucester. The Braxtons, the Brookses, the Burrells, which come out of Gloucester. The Callises, which is an old blue blood name of York County itself. The Chismans, the Collinsons, the Crosbys, the Cutters, Dixons, and the Diggs, which come out of Gloucester as well. The Fieldses, the Foxes, Frasers. Next, please. The Gainians, Ganton, who I'm going to make a reference to later as a U.S. colored troop. The Greens, which come out of Charles City. The Gregorys, the Griffins, the Grimes, Harrisons, the Harrods, the Hearns, which come out of Gloucester, Goodwin Island, I believe. The Howards, the Jacksons, the Chavises. And one of the most interesting names that I have been on my mind and I have attempted to do research are the Kids. They almost disappear from York County. Next, please. Let's see. The Mitters, the Montano, the Paynes, the Petersons, the Randalls, the Red Crosses, the Robinsons, the Sewells, the Smiths, the Stedmans. Next, please. Tarlington, Tolliver, Washington, Wood, Wormley, and Young. These are some of the long-established names of African American families that are still present today in York County that are a part of the census of March of 1865. Next, please. Next, I believe, is the Russell Plantation. And since my first name is Russell, it is the surname of my mother. So I have a direct link to the Russell Plantation, which was called Rosedown or Rosewood. Next, please. The slave schedule of 1850 in regard to York County of the Russell Farm, which at that time is owned by Thomas Charles Russell. The total enslaved is 70. It ranges in age from 90 to 1. There were 35 females and 35 males. And the number that was living on the farm in March of 1865 are 13. Most of what was the property is bequeathed to his sister, who has a plantation in Warwick County. Rosewood Plantation, also sometimes known as Rosedown. This is the Russell Plantation. Next, please. This is Cook Farm. And once again, there's a host of my family that is located on Cook Farm in March of 1865. Next, please. Among these families are the Brights, the Drews, the Howards, and then you see the Russells. My great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, Albert Russell. Rachel Banks, who is the mother of John Mallory Phillips, a well-known black entrepreneur of the latter part of the 19th century. Sarah, Jerome, Albert, and Priscilla. He dies in, I think, around 1874. Next, please. I think this is Poquoson Island. It does all of Poquoson, but the major plantation, which there will be referenced from time to time from me, will be Ashland Plantation, owned by Henry Smith. Next, please. These are the families of color of Poquoson, Virginia. The Baileys. The Coombs this is the spelling that is in the census, but it is C-O-M-B-S. Their family goes back to the 1670s, one of the oldest free families of color in what is now the United States, which is a part of York County. This is my great-great-grandmother, Susan Combs. Living at home with her at that time is Elvira, Curtis, and Dennis. What are called the Osmonds, they are truly the Hopsons. And if one does not know what you're looking for, you would probably dismiss them because it's probably a pronunciation. Because nobody told the truth when you became a census taker king. You would tell them anything to keep the heat off of you if they were looking for something. Among them are James, Isabella, John, Ella, and so on. This is my great-great-grandfather and my great-great-grandmother. And my great-great-grandmother is a Combs, and she is the daughter of Susan Combs. Next, please. The comments are the most interesting feature of this particular document because it tells you a great deal about attitudes. While you are looking over these particular comments that are made by the census taker, I'm going to make reference to others. This is one that is taken by the census taker. I think them bad men. He lives with Jordan Harris. His name is George Butler. Another, discharged from the army, idle, worthless fellow, Hines Browning. Rejected from service, often arrested rebels. He was Billy Goodwin. Not disposed to do anything that he doesn't want to do, William Ashby. Not included in labor land, has the name of a dishonest man, William Roberts. He's a one-eyed character, rather bad, Major Morris. Lives with Allen, reportedly a bad character, Alexander Allen. Don't bear no good character at all, Thomas Young. Wife at Norfolk, discharged from the army, an idle, worthless fellow, August Browning. Inclined to be very stubborn and willful, Julia Tolliver. Indolent, thievish, mulish, David Lee. Insane, Melina Banks. Some positive comments that were made. Very industrious, a carpenter. Boyd Lockley keeps key to work 22.5 acres of land. Milkman, very industrious. His wife, a dirty, indolent woman, Matthew Thomas. Very industrious and honest, but sickly, Thomas Hickman. Very industrious, just built a house, Jacob Hare. A single man, good character and industrious, Archer Smith. Now this is my best one of all. A single woman has a husband when she can get one, so she says. Fanny Clancy. A local incident occurred on May 1866, a court day in York County. An argument over the air of black confidence ended when Robert Lewis, a black, struck a white antagonist. Lewis was arrested but escaped. He was pursued by whites who had been confronted by at least 200 freedmen, fully armed, prepared to keep at all costs. Lewis was not captured. In June, Robert Powers, the presiding justice of the peace of the county of York, complained to the Freedmen's Bureau about the army for help. Quote, Robert Powers wrote, "It is my opinion at the present time not only impractical, but I believe impossible to execute civil laws satisfactorily unless officers of the civil law be assisted by the strong arm of the military." Close quote. In the midst of the new freedmen emerged a former slave runaway to Troy, New York, a physician named Daniel Norton. Along with his brothers Robert and Frederick, Daniel Norton makes Yorktown and the peninsula the center of black political power, self-determination, and self-improvement. One of the most pressing issues confronting the new freedmen was the issue of land, and settled by black refugees during the war. In the meeting at the First Baptist Church in Hampton in August of 1865, blacks argued passionately for the ownership of the property, in particular the farms that had been held under the authority of the Freedmen's Bureau. They denounced Andrew Johnson's decision to return the land to the rebel owners. There was increased mistrust between the freedmen of York County and the Union Army and the Freedmen's Bureau. In December of 1865, there was an election to the Freedmen's Court. The freedmen chose their representative, Daniel Norton. Daniel Norton's election was rejected by Orlando Brown, who ordered a new election because blacks had surely misunderstood that they were to choose a white representative. Lieutenant Massey, a bureau officer for York County, explained, quote, "The prevailing prejudice prevents as yet any citizen sitting on the same bench with a colored man," close quote, and, quote, "A white is no more accustomed to the form in the court of justice," close quote. The freedmen rejected the argument. A second election was put in place again. The freedmen elected Daniel Norton. Lieutenant Massey lectured them on the obligation of bureau authority, whereupon the freedmen left the meeting cheering Norton and firing off volley after volley of arms, close quote. Massey later rumored that Norton and others in York County had created a secret organization which had armed itself to defend blacks against both the rebels and the Bureau. Samuel Armstrong, the founder of Hampton Institute, became the assistant commissioner to the Bureau and ordered Massey to place a white person into the position to represent the blacks. Quote, "You're impelled to expel from the limits of your control any party whose influence is demoralizing the people and tends to produce an armed combination for resisting proper authority," close quote. As a result of the conflict over the appointment, Norton and Armstrong became bitter political opponents for the hearts and the loyalty of black voters on the peninsula. During 1867 to 1868, Daniel Norton served as a delegate to the Underwood Convention, which was writing a new constitution for the state of Virginia. He testified before the Congressional Committee on Reconstruction on Violence, quote, "Should representatives of the government leave the South, I do not think that the colored people would be safe. The spirit of whites against blacks are more worse than it was before the war," close quote. He organized the Lone Star Society, which served as a fusion political movement independent of Armstrong's Republicans and conservative Democrats. Daniel Norton represented James City County and York County in the Virginia Senate from 1871 to 1873, and again in 1877 to 1887. He introduced more than 11 bills. The most noted was his Virginia consent to the national government to purchase the land embracing the area of Cornwallis's surrender for the erection of a national monument. Later, he served as collector of the customs for the Port of Newport News, member of the Board of Visitors of Virginia Normal and Collegiate Institute, today known as Virginia State University, and Justice of the Peace in 1889. He also initiated with Joshua Ross, Robert Norton, John S. Jarvis, and Zebedee Randall a ferry service between Yorktown and Gloucester. Frederick S. Norton, his brother, served in the General Assembly from 1869 to 1871. He represented James City County and Winsburg. Brother Robert Norton served as a member of the General Assembly from 1869 to 1882, representing Elizabeth City County and York County. He ran a close election for Congress in 1874, narrowly losing. In addition, there were other black political holders, primarily in the position of Justice of the Peace, Overseer of the Poor, and Constables. Black freedmen held the most powerful position in the local government of York County, the post of the Commissioner of Revenue by William Washington. Next, please. These are the various U.S. colored detachments that were listed in the census. The 1st United States Colored Troops, the 2nd United States Colored Troops, the 6th United States Colored Troops, 16th U.S. Artillery, 18th United States Colored Troops, 26th United States Colored Troops, and the 36th United States Colored Troops.
How large were those units?
Pardon me?
How large were those units?
Usually under 200.
Were they classified as regiments?
Yes.
It wasn't a division or anything.
No. Yorktown was the home of a number of black regiments during the war. The 1st Regiment of the United States Colored Troops participated in the Battle of Petersburg, which is well known as the Battle of the Crater. Chapin's Farm, Newmarket Heights, and other encounters in North Carolina. The 4th, 5th, 6th, and 10th Colored Infantries carried out expeditionary raids in New Kent, King and Queen, Middlesex, and Matthews County, and participated in the Battle of Petersburg, the Bermuda Hundred, Chapin's Farm, and Newmarket Heights. Next, please. These are the listings found in the document of U.S. colored troops that were a part of this list. Carter Diggs, which was a member of the 26th U.S. Colored Troops. William Granton, I'll come back to him a little later. Randall Wood, Orange Young. Philip Washington, Mel Harrison, John Redcross, John Bassett, James Marsh, and Charles Hollister. Next, please. The total number of African American residents of Virginia that served in U.S. colored troops during the Civil War was 5,723.
You're not getting your next slide.
Okay.
This is the last slide.
Okay, well then, there should have been something else on it, but I guess it's not. And I guess I will have to read them to you. I don't usually like to read all of them. But these are the United States troops enlistment, York County, Virginia, 1863 to 1865. These are the individuals that were residents or had been residents of York County that joined U.S. colored troops. Believe it or not, most of them do not enlist in Yorktown. They're as far as South Carolina, Baltimore, Philadelphia, and Massachusetts. William Allen, Yorktown, 1864, the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment. He is the one from the battle, the movie Glory, the Battle of Fort Wagner off of Charleston, South Carolina. So William Allen, who was from Yorktown, was a member of the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment. George Banks, who was a member of the 5th Massachusetts Colored Cavalry. Andrew Brookin, which are related to the Brookins of York County. He is of the 23rd U.S. Colored Infantry. Andrew Booker, he is a member of the 23rd U.S. Colored Infantry. John Brown, the 29th. James H. Cook, 23rd. Thomas Davis, the 5th. William Dunn, the 24th. John Edwards, the 29th Connecticut Colored Volunteers. Philip Elliott, 11th U.S. Colored Heavy Artillery. Humphrey Gently. Charles Gordon. Robert G. Griffin, the 24th. Ishmael Hall, the 23rd. Henry Harrison, the 36th. Thomas Hill, the 6th U.S. Colored Troops. William Howard, the 23rd. James Johnson, the 23rd. Jeremiah Johnson, the 31st. William Jones, the 23rd. York Kidd, or Kitty, 21st U.S. Colored Infantry. Levi Lynch, 25th. John Mulligan, the 21st. James Patterson, the 2nd. William L. Patterson, the 1st. Edward Robinson, the 36th. George P. Robinson, the 29th. George Saunders, the 36th. Edmund Scott, the 10th. John Smith, the 36th. Robert Smith, the 23rd. William Smith, the 20th. Henry Stokes, the 35th. John Tolliver, the 36th. Dickinson Warren, the 42nd. Samuel Watkins, the 5th Massachusetts Colored Cavalry. William White, U.S. Colored Infantry. Washington Whitish, the 36th. John Williams, the 31st. Isaac Wilson, the 4th. And of them, there are approximately 13 that are buried at Yorktown. William Banks, which had been the 4th U.S. Colored Troops. Andrew Brooken, the 23rd. Sergeant Thomas J. Brooks, the 5th Massachusetts. Private William Cole, Private Lon Cook, Private Moses Canster, Charles Dietz, William Edwards, Jerry Gibson, George Gordon, Daniel Johnson, Benjamin Mann, Nathaniel Owens, Peter Price, and John Turner. They're all buried here at Yorktown, members of the U.S. Colored Troops. That is all the information that I have. And when I found the given area and I started doing the research, because it's something that you read about, and you can't always put your hands in a local level, but when I found and located the 41, it was just like being in a candy store, because it gave face and reason to those that had no face nor reason. And if you do not know that Yorktown, or Fortress Yorktown, is the major deployment area of large numbers of U.S. Colored Troops from 1864 to 1865. I'm going to share one other thing with you, and it is a short narrative that I've written. And I tried to give some aspect from the community that I grew up in. And this is called the low ground. As a part of the rural existence of my ancestors, there is a narrative of the low grounds. In Black life of the South, there's a mythical place where journeys and travails collide in a world of toil and hope. The low ground, or other words, the bottom, offers a glimpse into a day that is now gone and can only be realized through the flash moment of a memory. I remember my mother's conversation about the low ground. It was an agricultural oasis, scattered fields located between Carriage Chapel Road, Mansion Road, and Big Bethel Road to the south. The marshlands bound the low ground to the east and served as foraging area for cows. The woodlands bordered to the west, and as the farming declined, the fields disappeared, were replaced by reborn, expanding forest. A portion of this land had been a part of Ashland Plantation, once owned by Henry Smith of the pre-Civil War era. The community had been founded by black freedmen and freedmen following the Civil War. The community evolved from a wagon path to a corduroy road of logs, faced over by dirt, eventually to the road of the memory of my childhood, that of tar and gravel rock. Land had been purchased in parcels that navigated the wagon path, usually to an average of 5 to 6 acres deep. As time progressed, those who had lived in the interior of the woodlands moved closer to the road. Here was the beginning of community, forged by the circumstances defined by race culture. The people of this community were related by family ties, some whose documented lineage reached to the late 1600s, and other souls who had languished in slavery and had been liberated by the events of the Great Getting Up Morning and self-emancipation. From the turn of the 19th century through the 1930s, This community of color, composed of small farmers, watermen, domestics, farm laborers, interacted with the social, political, economic forces that influenced their lives. There was no special social or political elite in their midst, for custom and tradition forged the egalitarian spirit fostered by labor, tenacity, was the bedrock of the community's existence. For the low ground, the horse and plow gave rise to the bounty of vegetables and fruits, to be sold primarily in Hampton and Newport News by truck farmers to upper middle class white patrons. The fields of butter peas, string beans, potatoes, sweet potatoes, fresh corn, melons, and strawberries nestled the fertile land in the spring and the summer. Collards, kale, and Hanover salad were the major fall crops. What time was not taken by parents' fields, whose day began sometimes at 5 a.m. and stretched throughout the day, there was the off chance of picking others' fields for extra money. My mother related the story that during the Great Depression, she picked over 100 quarts of strawberries in one day at 5 cents a quart. It was the equivalent of my father's paycheck for 1 week as a dump truck driver. The low ground represented a presence of life with all of its possibilities, promises, and obstacles. The land of the low ground, whose transformation was almost complete as the timberland by the time of my youth. I remembered as a man-child, riding my bicycle on the various paths that had been forged by timbermen who had harvested the lumber. The awe of the pristine waters filling ditches streaming towards a system of channeled ditches abutting Carriage Chapel Road, merging and curving behind Johnny's store, then moving towards Stony Creek, imprinted into my youthful memory. The discovery of the remnants of the orchards, the apple and pear trees as I hunted birds with my air rifle created a consciousness of inquiry of whom, when, and how. During the 1940s in what had become the community baseball field on Mansion Road, steeplechase races were held on Sunday afternoons. Bicycle races by young males of the community were an additional feature. These events, attended by members of the community, offered solace and amusement and a respite from the normalcy of their lives, the survivorship and hard work. The lives and the labors and the dreams of my ancestors emerged from the fertile bottomland, representatives of generations whose narratives of achievement and place etched in the memory of a community. Quote, human dignity is more precious than prestige. Clark K. Thank you. Oh, yeah, certainly. You mind if I sit down? I'm sweating. I don't know why I'm sweating. Go ahead.
Mr. Hopson, where...
I know you.
Yes, you do. You taught me geography in 7th grade.
Right. Where was Rosewood Farm, and where exactly was Ashland?
Ashland Plantation is where Henry Smith's farm is located off of Cliff Creek Road. But it encompassed most of Carriage Chapel Road, which is Carriage Chapel Road today. Rosedown is in the general area of Tabb High School. It was a huge plantation. It extended all the way to the Newport News Warwick City line. As a matter of fact, on the other side of the line, what was the bridge that was built was another relative of Charles Thomas Russell, who owned that given plantation.
And so that was the one that was across the street from Halfway House?
Yes, in that general area. Lemuel Russell is the land. Lemuel Russell was the person that I believe that the land, his estate was the land that Tabb High School was built upon. Yes.
I have two questions. One is, when you first started talking about there were 40,000 freedmen in New York County.
On the peninsula.
On the peninsula, and they had come from other areas.
Yes.
Is that because of Fort Monroe that they came?
Fort Monroe is the early sanctuary for contraband. The very first contraband under General Butler arrives at Fortress Monroe. So when Yorktown falls to the Union forces after Magruder's retreat, then towards Williamsburg, all of this area falls under Union control, and it becomes a logical place for other persons to come to. As I mentioned to you, the Emancipation Proclamation only freed those areas that were under Confederate control. So York County becomes the logical destination for people who are coming from Gloucester, New Kent, Charles City, Surrey, Isle of Wight, Southampton.
because it offers a sanctuary. These areas are contentious almost to the end of the Civil War. Union Army troops don't occupy or hold these areas. So large numbers of people flee sanctuary here in York County. For all practical purposes, the wealthy, well-to-do has supported the Confederate cause, leave. Some go to Richmond, some go elsewhere. Some no longer have the power to control over their slave populations. So all practical purposes, they are now benign. So thousands come to York County to seek sanctuary.
And then just the other small question, when I first came to Williamsburg, I lived off Bypass Road, and I had been told that there was a Freeman village or camp where Kmart is today. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not that familiar, but that would not surprise me in the least bit.
Because that would be York County. That is
Right.
York County.
Northern York County was the areas of the heaviest black population. By the time, at the end, by the census of 1870, 4 managerial districts are heavily black. One is close to 50-50, that is Grafton. One is still predominantly white, and that is Poquoson. But the rest of the managerial districts that make up York County is heavily, heavily black.
Which you talking about the Bartlett plantation that's connected to Camp Perry and would be stretched over by Kmart. I kind of sort of think that's what you are talking about.
I have a map here of what are called the Negro farms of York County. And if you can, you might be able to look and to locate where that, you talk about Skidmore, that general Camp Perry, that area?
Yes.
I don't know whether there, I have not looked to pinpoint what farm may have been inclusive of that. There's an individual named Brian Palmer who has ancestors that were born on the area of Camp Perry who contacted me most recently. And he is now doing research in that regard. So hopefully there will be some new material that will be coming out soon.
I was just saying because Carmine and I, when we did Camp Perry, that's when we discovered the Bartlett Farms, which was connected to Hollywood Park.
Well, then,
And I think that's what she's speaking about, the Bartlett Farm that stretched all over Hollywood Park back where Kmart is. That's what I think we need to talk about.
I'm not that for me. Most of my research was southeastern York County.
We did that, some before that.
Yes.
On Wormley Creek, where I currently live, my grandfather, who lived at the end of Old Wormley Creek Road, called the point across where my parents bought Hopson's Point.
H-O-B or H-O-P?
I couldn't tell you. Although after my parents bought it, he called it Chigger Hill.
Okay.
But it's off of Waterview Road.
Okay, is that in close proximity to Poquoson River?
Oh, no, this is on Wormley Creek.
Okay, so it would not be. That's,
But I know there were a lot of black watermen up there, and my grandfather came from New Jersey, and he made absolutely certain that his kids had great respect for those people, and my mother always called them Uncle so-and-so and Uncle, you know, like that. And there were these black watermen who were, you know, in and out of Wormley Creek and doing all that, Washington doing all that sort of stuff like that in the 20s,
yes.
when she would have been growing up there.
Well, my grandfather would have worked those, he was a riverman himself. His name was William Tilton Hopson. I doubt that very seriously. Most of the Hopsons are in Poquoson, Wren Road, the area of Messick. One would not think that they were present, but Poquoson does have a long history of the presence of African Americans in their presence. Even in the 1920s, there are African Americans who are living in Messick. So the Poquoson of today is by no stretch of the imagination, because Poquoson at one time was an entire managerial district. It included Bethel Road, it included Upper Tab, and so on.
Yeah, well, this is Seaport, Danny, all, and that's, you know, right over there.
But as I said, my family comes out of the most extreme southeastern part of York County, which is the area of Poquoson. Are there? Yes.
I've been trying to figure out how Magruder became Magruder.
It's named after the general.
I know it was named after the general, but why is a black community named after a general? When did it form? When did the actual,
I can't tell you
when did the
that.
actual Magruder form?
All I remember is that Magruder is the commanding Confederate general. As he retreats behind a redoubt. The redoubt is called Magruder's redoubt for all practical purposes. It is the last line of defense for Williamsburg, in which inevitably they will abandon. So I would assume, I don't know whether or not someone else may be a little bit familiar with that. I don't have a clue of why Magruder, that community itself, which is predominantly black, would have a name named after a Confederate general.
Okay, we're descendants of the Whitings from Magruder.
Well, you are also related to me then, because the original Whiting will marry her name was Sarah Whiting, has a child by Thomas Combs, and Thomas Combs is a white male indentured servant, and this is the latter part of the 1600s. And the Whitings are one of the interesting, York County is not one of the burnt counties. York County is all of its records are intact. So being intact, you will find that if you start doing research, there is what is called the Registry of Free Blacks and Mulattoes, which began in 1792 and goes to around 1860. There are wills and other information that are part of the county records. So if one is doing research, there is a bounty of information. It's one of the richest depositories of records about black people in America. Right here in York County. Because Williamsburg, I think initially is carved out of York County. And early Williamsburg records are a part of York County's records.
Theory about Magruder is that, of course, the Fort Magruder was right there. And I didn't realize until I started doing all of this is information that was new to me because of the Sesquicentennial and started to look into where it was. But across the street from Waller Mill, no, from Magruder, across the street from Magruder School, you know where Magruder School is, there's this little park, right? There's a little park, and that is what is left of Magruder's fort.
Well, what happened was that it was always called George Tinsley's plantation. Mr. Tinsley owned from York County all the way to Richmond. He owned all that. And after the Civil War, Magruder raised so much can in Williamsburg, they named it Magruder, all that.
Oh, the area. But there was a fort, and
Yes.
that is exactly the fort where all the roads came to exactly that spot when the Union troops left from here. That's when they ran
And
it.
that's how come it got the name. But prior to that, it was George Tinsley's farm.
And I have the listing of who lived on that farm.
But you didn't miss my family. What happened?
Well, I have the transcription here. So your family should be, and I have all of the names of the families that lived on Tinsley's farm.
And I have a map of the landowners in the groups that we did, Will and I did. So, farmers that actually tried.
Any more questions?
Do you have any information on the slave population
If I had known that, I would have brought it, because I do. Matter of fact, I just don't have it with me present. Henry Smith is the owner.
I am the great grandson.
Okay, and well, I'd rather say nothing. Henry Smith owned most of the property, and the censuses of 1850, 1860, 1870 gives you a general. Henry Smith, I think, comes from the Eastern Shore, around 1794.
What I was called Oxford.
Right. And the remnants today is called Henry Smith's Farm, right?
It's called, what's left of it, we own.
Right.
But that's not much.
Okay. But most of Chapel Road, I think, was Ashland's, part of Ashland Plantation.
He paid $3,000 for it.
Well, my understanding is that after the American Revolution, lands that had been owned by Tories were taken by others who had supported the American cause. And so largely it was the people came from elsewhere and occupied Tory land. So, and there is that deep connection between Eastern Shore, Poquoson, and areas of down in Hampton, Elizabeth City County, these families are ultimately related to each other. Yes?
I live in Seaford on Back Creek Road, and there's banks that live down the road from me.
Yeah.
Carol Barber was my next door neighbor.
Mhm.
Was she kin to you, or you know her?
The Banks family that I know about is a white female indentured servant that has a liaison with a man of African descent, and all of the Bankses that live in northern York County, southeastern York County, Grafton, Surrey, are all descendants of this particular individual. York County has one of the earliest, largest free black population, which come into focus in the late 1600s, and in certain instances, they are the descendants of white females and African or Indian males, because the mother defines the status of the child. So if the child, if the mother is free, then the child is free. So the great seed of free blacks in Virginia, or the colony of Virginia, in certain instances at the very beginning, is that of white female indentured servants.
As anybody, those of us who care anything about history, think it's so important for us to hear each other's stories. I think it's vital. If we don't understand our stories, how can we understand ourselves? We don't know where we've come from. So I'm so grateful for Mr. Hopson for coming to present this material. Information we don't know much about at all, and unless you spent your life looking it up, there's no place you can find it. So can you give a hand? I have a gift, a small gift. It's not actually, just a small gift from the historical committee.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate your coming. Let's give him another.